Good evening, and welcome to Tales from Perdition. This is Angel's Tale, Chapter 4, A Sleepy Little Town. A tiny little town, fragile and insignificant compared to the towering mountains, endless woodlands, a mark of humanity's defiance in this new world. The town had everything you could need: a pub, a library, a schoolhouse, town hall, and a few scattered houses and shops. Not much happened here, and the residents were keen for it to stay that way. The scattered concrete and wood buildings dotted the once empty campgrounds. It stood as a reminder of what we once had, the luxury of choosing to go for a camping trip or a simple drive through the national parks. Now, it was a necessity to be away from what we once centered our lives around. Perdition was fairly quiet this time of day. Only a few ATVs were parked at the side of the town's pub. Both Nat and Riona pulled into the dirt parking lot, if you could call it that. They both shut off their engines, and Nat turned to look at Riona. "I'm heading inside. You have anything you need to take care of?" Riona nods. "Not much, just gotta check the board." "Not much, just gotta check the board." With that, Nat ventured into the wooden pub, leaving Riona to her own devices once more. Riona passed a small group of Acer PMCs standing outside one of the town's few storefronts. She didn't recognize any of them, but she still gave them a wave. Most of them wore a standard Reagan plate carrier. Each one of them had an M4 slung over their shoulder or their chest. They didn't pay her much mind, besides a few glances in her direction and a couple of nods and acknowledgement. Riona made her way over to a familiar board. The bulletin board was weathered. The paint was peeling, exposing the recycled wood underneath. Many holes and marks adorned the board from the various nails and pushpins and whatever else people tried to use up to hang up notices. Most of the notices weren't of any interest to the wayfinder. Of course, the most prominent ones were the town rules and an old poster from Acer, which urged people to turn in their old money for the ecologically friendly maples. Riona didn't know if being ecologically friendly mattered much anymore, since the earth itself seemed to hate humanity. The town rules are pretty straightforward. Nonetheless, she still did a once-over for any added rules. You never know. 1. No fighting amongst yourselves. If you got a problem, take it outside town. 2. Guns are to remain stowed and unloaded while you're in town. 3. Tabs are not to be made in the pub, nor are you to make a tab at the library. 4. All radios must be turned off by midnight. 5. If you don't work, you don't eat. 6. All wayfinders must bathe before interacting with anything in the town. Nope, nothing new. Rihanna sighed and took out her notepad from one of her cargo pockets. She flipped to an unused page and wrote a notice of her own. Stay away from the HZ fence. She used one of the half-rusted nails to pin it up. She didn't want to even think about the last time she got a tetanus shot. Hopefully, her notice might save at least a few rank 1 wayfinders from going missing. One could certainly hope. You could fill a novel with the faces of inexperienced wayfinders never coming back from their first job. With her goal complete, Rihanna made her way to the pub. On the covered porch, she spotted one of the pub's regulars smoking a cigarette. The middle-aged man squinted at her as she made her way past him. She gave him a quick nod and a half smile as she entered the doors of the pub. Despite Rihanna being around the block many times before, she still never seemed to lose the dirty looks whenever she made her way into town. The wayfinder made her way inside, glad not to have cigarette smoke in her face. The pub was filled with a mishmash of different tables and chairs. A few coupled together booths were tucked away in the back of the pub. several stuffed and very much tacky deer heads stare daggers down at Riona as she looked around for Nat. The broad-chested bartender gave her a polite nod as he was filling up the ice chest. Riona returned the gesture. She noticed Nat sitting in one of the booths talking with a woman she didn't recognize. Riona squinted as she walked over to the booth. She noticed something strange with the woman. Although she looked normal enough, instead of human ears, she had wolf ears. Another freak of nature, just like her it seemed. She looked younger than Riona by a few years. She had long brown hair, braided in a few places to keep her hair out of her way. Her face was freckled, her olive green eyes did not glance in Riona's direction. Her vulpine ears twitched as Riona neared them. She could probably hear her coming. The other wayfinder finished a conversation and turned to regard her. The woman's eyes widened as she locked hers with Riona. Her olive green eyes were filled with surprise and a flicker of curiosity. She blinked a couple of times and cleared her throat, regaining her professionalism. "You here for the job too? I'm Farron, and you are?" Riona glanced at Nat, who had her head buried in her paperwork, and she turned her attention back to Farron. "Riona, nice bow, by the way," she complimented, gesturing to the compound bow on her back. Farron glanced at her own bow and shrugged. Could be nicer, but thanks anyways." Riona nods and sits down in the booth beside Nat, who looks up from her clipboard. "We still need one more." Farron stood up from the table. "I'll see if I can get one more. Shouldn't be a problem." Farron walked off to find another wayfinder for the job. Riona glanced at Nat. A few other questions were coursing through her mind. "So, what's the ROE for this?" Nat raised an eyebrow at the question. "Rate of equity?" "The rate of equity?" Riona shook her head. "Rules of engagement," she gently corrected Nat. "Ah, well, just observe before engaging and whatnot." Riona nodded in understanding. Simple enough. The wolf-eared wayfinder returned with a younger man in tow. He looked younger than the other two wayfinders. He had short and slightly messy black hair. He looked at them with hopeful, steel-colored eyes. He wore some rather tattered-looking jeans and some kind of hunting jacket over a simple t-shirt. He had a decent-looking scoped Lee-Enfield rifle slung over his shoulder, unloaded, of course. He didn't look like much to Riona. The young man's eyes snuck glances towards Riona's eyes, shifting his gaze away from her when she locked eyes with them. He then glanced at Farron to introduce everyone to him. She gestured to the other two still sitting at the booth. "This is Nat and Riona. Nat and Riona, this is Alan." Alan smiled and extended his hand to shake. They both took their turns returning the gesture. "Nice to meet you both." Riona smiled in return. It was nice to see someone with a more positive attitude. Maybe someone more upbeat. Or just maybe someone not as gloomy as Nat. "Nice to meet you as well," they replied. Nat passed them the necessary forms to fill out. "Right, let's get down to business. We're going after a bat anomaly. We think it's a Class 3 anomaly. It was responsible for the death of 2 Acer patrolmen. We don't know where its lair or nest is, although we do know where its territory is." Nat reaches into her pocket and pulls out a map. She unfolds the map on the table. The three wayfinders lean in to get a closer look. Nat points at the map. "This little town here, Winthrop. This is where we think its nest is, although it isn't confirmed." Nat glanced around. Both Farron and Riona listened intently. Alan glanced between the map and the military escort with a hint of worry in his eyes. "That's not a lot to go on," Riona remarked. Farron nodded in agreement with the older woman's statement. "If we can't kill it at the very least, we can pass enough intel to the military or Acer about it," Nat replied. "We might be out there for a few days, so make sure you have enough supplies for that. We'll stop at the gas station to pick up anything you need." The wayfinders nodded in agreement. "Any questions?" The table was silent. Nat nodded and stood up from the table. "Let's go get this done then. I got a full list of jobs to take care of after this." Nat made her way outside with the wayfinders in tow. They once again passed one of the chain-smoking regulars, who focused his gaze between the three women for a longer period than in what was considered polite. They returned to the makeshift parking lot. The group mounted up and turned on their engines. That, of course, led the group at the front. They left the sleepy town behind. Another repurposed sign showed directions for the Gull gas station and the military checkpoint in spray-painted letters. Only a mile away from the shit-nothing town, they could see a lonely little gas station at the side of the road. The windows were blacked out. Each pump had a handwritten out-of-order sign attached to the handles. They pulled into the faded parking spaces. The asphalt was cracked and discolored from the lack of maintenance. They exited their ATVs and powered off their engines. Nat walked casually inside, Rihanna and the others following behind. Although the exterior looked questionable, the interior was surprisingly clean and well maintained. The 4 aisles were well stocked with various snacks. Most of them were off-brand or slightly expired, or both. A young, sleep-deprived cashier with glazed eyes stood behind the counter. Rihanna gave a small wave to the young man and went about to walk the aisles. She grabbed a large gallon-sized jug of water, a handful of pemmican bars, an Arnold Palmer, a bottle of Tabasco, and a bag of beef jerky. She walked up to the counter to pay, waiting behind Alan. The cashier read out his total. Alan pulled out a fistful of maples and handed it to him. The cashier squinted his eyes as he looked at the strange currency. "I don't know what that is," he stated in a monotone voice. Alan raised his eyebrow and looked down at his maples. Sorry?" The cashier stared at him blankly. Rihanna piped up, "They don't accept maples here, kid. Here, you'll accept these." Rihanna handed him a small ring of pop tabs. Alan furrowed his brow as he held the pop tabs. "They're worth 25 cents each. They should be enough," Rihanna reassured him. He nodded and smiled in gratitude. "I'm gonna pay you back for those." Rihanna smirked at this and shook her head. "Not a chance." Alan grumbled in response, earning a chuckle from Perrin. As he finished paying, he asked, "Would you like a receipt?" Alan shrugged and answered, Sure." The clerk nodded. Instead of the printer spitting out a receipt, the clerk handwrote each item and its price and handed it to Alan. The last two in line checked out without much incident. Rihanna squinted at Nat, taking in her features. Although she was pretty, something was off with her. She had shoulder-length gray hair, which was odd considering she looked younger than Rihanna, and her eyes were pink, almost having a slight glow to them. Her eyes were glassy and glazed over. Her skin was paler than it should be. She looked rather sickly and tired, judging from the bags under her eyes. Guess being a military escort really took it out of her. Not like it was her business, though. The group exited the gas station with their bags of groceries. Rihanna packed away her extra food and mounted up, ready to continue onto the checkpoint. The 4 ATVs continued on, driving through the highway. The trees twisted into strangers' shapes as they neared the checkpoint. The checkpoint was a well-fortified wall of sandbags, pesco, barbed wire, machine gun emplacements, and bunkers. A concrete pillbox stood in the road's median, with a raised road barrier on each side. Several Humvees and GLTVs were parked on the side of the road. Each one has a mounted weapon. The checkpoint was well manned with heavily armed Acer patrolmen and military personnel. Each one forms a closely watched and guarded perimeter. The checkpoint guard standing in front of the doorway of the pillbox spoke into his radio as he saw the approaching ATVs. Nat gave him a small wave as she pulled up to the checkpoint. She started to fish out her paperwork for the guard to look over. He glanced over at everyone in the group, making a small note of their appearance and basic records such as their name and call signs, in case things went south. He also got an approximation for how long their contract was going to take. Of course, he still had to verbally remind them the basics. "Right. You all know the drill by now, I hope. No hunting, foraging, or anything of that sort from the hazard zone. What else? Oh yeah. Don't piss off the Fae." They all nodded in agreement. Alan seemed to be taking mental notes of what the man was saying. He nods approvingly at Nat's paperwork and hands it back to her. That about covers everything. Happy hunting. He gave them a quick smile and pressed a button to open the road barrier for the fire team. The hazard zone lay ahead. And that was Chapter 4 of Angel's Tale. And as usual, good night, listeners. Good night.